Hello Year 2. It's time for another part of Wigglesbottom Primary's Break Time Bunnies. Now, when I had a little look at this the other day, it turns out, even though the first story was all about the Break Time Bunnies, it's actually 3 stories, not 3 different chapters. So the next story is called The Special Guest. So it still takes place at Wigglesbottom Primary. So let's see who the special guest is. Okay. One day, Miss Riley, that's our teacher, said that a special guest would be coming to our class. And then she got a nervous look on her face and said, "Our special guest might ask you questions about me." We all looked at each other because we didn't know who this special guest was or why they would ask us questions about Miss Riley when they could just ask her themselves. That's when Joel Jack pointed at Miss Riley and did a weird winking thing and said, "Gotcha!" But Miss Riley didn't notice because she was too busy tidying her desk and taking all the empty crisp packets out of her drawers and putting them in the bin. That's when Joel Jack said that the special guest was obviously the man from the TV who does all the talent shows, and that he must be coming here so he could find out if Miss Riley was good enough to be on a big TV talent show. Lauren Carr said, "Like an audition?" Joel Jack nodded loads. Everyone started to get really excited about the talent man coming to our classroom, and Jaden King even did a bit of a dance thing and said that he was going to audition too. Sunita Ram said that when the special guest arrived, we all needed to tell them how talented Miss Riley was so that she got to go on TV. But none of us knew what Miss Riley's talent was. Lauren Carr said that Miss Riley's talent might be writing on the whiteboard really neatly. But Joel Jack said that that was boring and that you didn't get on TV just because you could write neatly, and that Miss Riley must have a hidden talent that we didn't know about. Then all of a sudden there was a knock at the door and a man with no hair and loads of folders came in. Yes. The man didn't look anything like the man from TV, but then Joel Jack said that people from TV always look different in real life, and that one time his gran saw the Queen in Morrison's and that it had taken her ages to figure out who it was because she looked so different in real life next to the eggs. We all stared at the man, but he didn't even look at us or Miss Riley. He just walked in, took a seat at the back of the classroom and opened up one of his folders. Then Joel said, "This is it, people." And we all nodded because Miss Riley's audition had obviously started. We all crossed our fingers and stared at Miss Riley because we couldn't wait to see what her hidden talent was. But then Miss Riley started speaking in a bit of a weird voice, twirling her hands all over the place when she was talking. Joel Jack whispered that he thought Miss Riley's hidden talent must be hand dancing. And that made sense because she definitely wasn't using her hands like she normally did. And I had never actually seen someone twirl their hands around as much as Miss Riley was doing. Miss Riley was obviously really nervous about her scary hand dancing audition because she kept dropping the whiteboard markers when she was trying to write on the board, getting our names mixed up, and we kept having to help by picking up the pens and telling her our real names over and over again. Miss Riley's audition obviously wasn't going very well, and as soon as the bell went, our special guest rushed out. Miss Riley flopped onto her chair and put her head down on the desk. That's when Joel Jack said that it was all over and that Miss Riley had failed her audition because professional hand dancers don't drop the board markers 10 times during their act. But then Jaden King said that it wasn't over until it was over, and then he ran out of the classroom. We had no idea what Jaden was up to, so Sunita shouted, "Follow him!" And we did. And when we found him, he was standing outside the staff room. Jaden said that it was up to us to convince the talent man to give Miss Riley a second audition. So we knocked on the staff room door and said that we needed to speak to the talent man, please. But Mr. Harris didn't know who we were talking about. So we peeked through the door and pointed, and Mr. Harris got a weird look on his face, and he said, "Why do you need to speak to Mr. Powell?" So we told Mr. Harris that we wanted to tell Mr. Powell how talented Miss Riley was, and Mr. Harris started smiling loads and saying that that was a great idea. And then he pushed us towards where Mr. Powell was sitting by himself eating a sandwich. So that's when we started saying loads of stuff about Miss Riley's hands, like how long her fingernails were and how well she could usually hold a pen. And how excellent she was at waving. Then Sunita started talking about all the different colours of nail polish Miss Riley had, and that's when Mr. Harris started pushing us back towards the door again and saying that it was time for us to get to class, even though the bell hadn't gone yet. But Jaden King folded his arms and said that we weren't going anywhere until Mr. Powell gave Miss Riley a second chance, because she was probably the most talented teacher in the whole school, and maybe even the world. Everyone stared at Mr. Powell to see what he would say, especially Mr. Harris. Then Mr. Powell stood up, brushed the sandwich crumbs off his little waistcoat and said, "OK." So we all raced along to the classroom to warn Miss Riley about her second audition, so she could do some finger exercises to get her hands ready before Mr. Powell arrived. Miss Riley still had her head on the desk when we got there, but she lifted it up straight away when we told her Mr. Powell was on his way. As soon as Mr. Powell was sat at the back of the classroom again with all his folders, Miss Riley told us that it was time to get back to our Shakespeare project. And then she brought out loads of costumes. And we all got to wear them and pretend we were the characters in the play. And it was so good that we completely forgot about Mr. Powell and Miss Riley's hand dancing audition. When the bell for lunch rang, Mr. Powell stood up and walked over to Miss Riley and shook her hand and said, "Well done, that was excellent." And we all cheered because we knew that Miss Riley had passed her audition and that she was going to be on TV. As soon as Mr. Powell left, Mr. Harris came rushing in and Miss Riley gave him a thumbs up. Then Joel Jack asked what day Miss Riley was going to be on TV doing her hand dancing because he wanted to record it. And Miss Riley got a weird look on her face and said, "My what?" And that's when we found out that Miss Riley wasn't a professional hand dancer and that she definitely wasn't going to be on TV and that she had only been doing the weird hand twirling because she was nervous. Mr. Harris said that Mr. Powell was a school inspector and that he had come to evaluate our school and watch Miss Riley teach. And Sunita said, "So it was an audition then?" And Mr. Harris smiled and said, "Yes, I suppose it was. An audition for the most talented teacher." And Miss Riley won. So we all cheered again, and Miss Riley laughed and said, "Thank you, thank you." And then she started twirling her hands all over the place to make us laugh, and it was hilarious. And that's when we all knew that Jaden King was right, and that Miss Riley was the best teacher in the world. And there's Miss Riley. I think I would have to argue that Miss Riley may not be the best teacher in the world, and I'm hoping my year twos would choose somebody else as their best teacher. I hope you are all being safe and are listening to mums and dads at home, and I will do another story in a couple of days. See you soon.